Access USA gave me the possibility to believe. I think that's the most important thing that I realized.
That's cool. But anyway, so with that, I think that's a good way to start. And so the first question is, if you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself, where you're studying now, what you're studying, where you're from,
So
a little bit of your background. That would be great.
No, I'd love to do that. And hi there again. My name's Alonso and I'm from Spain. And I grew up there for the first 10 years of my life. And then I headed off to boarding school in the UK. Did that for the last 8-9 years of my school career at boarding school. And then was deciding what I wanted to do between staying in the UK, going off to the US. And I basically looked at what I had done throughout my school and career and where I'd be better suited to actually heading over to university. And that was a big point of thinking, which led me to think about the US. And obviously, the US application is very different to the UK application. So you had to deeply think about which points in terms of, you got the personal statement for the UK, you got all the essays you have to write for the US. And for us boys who've been studying, or kids in general who've been studying in the UK their whole lives, we weren't really prepared for this US way of selling yourself and linking stories together to be able to apply to university. So I came across David, and he really helped me access USA. And David, he really helped me put my thoughts together and apply to the United States. And finally, I was very fortunate to land an offer at UPenn to study in the Huntsman Program, which is a dual degree program between the Wharton School of Business, where you can decide to concentrate on whatever concentration at Wharton. I'm concentrating in finance and AI, which is a new concentration at Wharton. And then you got the other side of the dual degree, the other degree, which is international studies. And that mainly entails courses within history, international relations, philosophy. And you also got a core part of the program, which is the languages side of the program. And I started off as a target within German. And then we did in a lot of French classes into my program because I was very interested in the Francophone world. And I'm in the US right now still. I'm on my third year of university. And I'm very excited to stay in the United States for a very long time and work there. I'm starting off to work in the realm of finance, but I'm open to many different paths and hopefully end up in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley soon.
Great. Well, look, you've done an awful lot since we last spoke. I'm sure we could talk for hours. And the Huntsman program is clearly one of those great interdisciplinary programs, and we're clearly a good candidate for that. Your languages, your international experience, et cetera. Jumping back to as you began to think about the next step when you were in high school. So it sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, on the one hand, excited about the opportunities. On the other hand, maybe somewhat intimidated about the process. Is that correct? Is that fair?
I mean, I briefly mentioned this in my previous answer, but what I was trying to say was that it's very tough when you're in a schooling system that doesn't really prepare you for applications in the United States. And you're competing against kids that in the United States are purely prepared to enter US universities. They prepare them for the AP system, for the SAT. And it does feel intimidating being on the other side and being, wow, okay, this is a very different application to universities in Europe. Because in Europe, in the UK, you have your UCAS system where you write one individual essay for all universities, and you don't actually have to investigate in depth each individual university you apply to because you don't really reference them in your UCAS application. Whereas in the United States, you have maybe potentially 5 different essays for a single university, a couple of essays for a single university. And that was indeed intimidating because you didn't really know how to attack the core issue, which was, how can I bring myself to light, which I think was the most important thing that I realized when I was going through this process. You gave a great analogy on how you had to write and go through this process, which is writing a canvas and painting a canvas, not writing a canvas, painting a canvas. And on that canvas, you have to show all different parts of your personality, whether academic, extracurricular, sport, drama, whatever it is that you do in your free time that makes you who you are, really. And painting that oil canvas is not easy because, as anyone who does art or appreciates art knows, if you don't try and link all the different blends and parts of personality together, you do end up with an absolute disaster. So that side of the process was a little bit intimidating. And obviously you're going to the other side of the pond. That's the first thing. Yeah. You're miles away from home. I was personally used to it because I went off to boarding school, but I do know based on experience, it is intimidating for the first time. But I would say that it's not only intimidating for you, it's intimidating for everybody. And there's not a big boarding school culture in the United States either. So you're on the same foot as really everyone on the first day. People aren't really as comfortable. You also got to think the United States is a continent. It's not a country, as I like to say. And you'll have people coming from, I go to Penn and you have people coming from California and the Midwest and everything. And it's far away from where school actually is. So you may seem like you're just because you come from abroad, and you don't, you're not necessarily the only one that doesn't feel they're at home.
So we've talked a little bit before we got on the call about your time at Penn, and obviously it's been a great experience for you. You feel very comfortable there, feel like you made the right choice. And yet when we think back a couple of years to when you were going through that process, maybe you weren't so sure. Was there a moment that you began to realize that actually this might be right for you, that it might be realistic, that somewhere like Penn would be a good fit for you? How did that all come together?
Do you mean mainly throughout the process?
Yeah. Was there a time?
Applying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first few times really where I started becoming intrigued was when I spoke to a couple of Huntsman students as well, and I reached out to them and really started thinking, you've also got to be very realistic in this process, and you've got to think, where do my chances lie biggest? And you've got to look at yourself and look at the programs that universities offer and really feel that where do I have my highest chance of getting there, and where's my true passion? And I think for me, really finding something like the Huntsman program really did flip the switch for me. I felt like I was pretty well suited for it based on my languages and my international background. And I do really encourage students, just because these interdisciplinary programs, people say they're more competitive or not competitive. I'd say that really those small percentage point differences, really basis point differences, aren't really much at all. And I think the moment where I realized was really reading into the curriculum as well, and looking at the professors that led the program as well. Huntsman program has a couple of fantastic professors leading the program. Kelly Cleary is a great director. We've also got Professor Osmond Balkan, who's a great professor as well, and two phenomenal professors that taught me during my first year in a Huntsman specific class, which Huntsman students have to do when they arrive in their first year, which were Rudra Sil and Professor Vijay Singh. And I think I also read about that class before I arrived. So I think two things, sorry, very long-winded answer and very unstructured, but I'd say speaking to students there and the opportunities that Huntsman gave you, also looking at the syllabus was very key for me, and the quality of the professors, really. Those were factors that really flipped the switch for Penn. And more than anything, it was I kept on listening to one common thread when I was speaking to alumni at Penn, was the work hard, play hard mentality was something that really flipped the switch for me. I think it is true. There's a big social aspect for Penn that is still very vibrant. Greek life is still very present, and not just Greek life. Social scene and social setting is still very big. And as much as I'm someone that enjoys academic rigor and an academic setting, I think it's incredibly important to have that social aspect as well. And I've been fortunate at Penn to have that. So it's really those three factors when I realized that Penn was a good fit for me.
Well, good. I remember quite clearly how you did your research, you did your homework, you really rolled up your sleeves, and that's so important as part of the process. As you think back now, a pivot, when we first started working together, what was your perspective? What did it look like to you week to week, the collaboration?
So I really felt like it was a great partnership, because I thought Access USA, and I worked with you, David, specifically, and also some other members I remember of the team, but specifically with you. And I've always described it to people that I've been trying to tell, hey, I think you should go work with Access USA, is you receive as much as you put in. And I think it's an incredibly fair process, and it's for people that actually really want to buy into the process and actually put hours into the process, because I really felt the more hours I put into the process, the more hours David put into the process, and therefore the better the partnership was, because the more we advanced in essays. And I used to write essays maybe till 2, 3 a.m. in the morning some days, and then David at 9 a.m. would actually clear all those doubts and go through all the essays and correct them through. And then I would be at 11 a.m. or at 12 when I got up to actually write those corrections and work on those corrections. And I really think that's the key of a relationship with someone you're trying to work with, because a one-sided relationship in a partnership never works. And I really did value that perspective of, I'm going to put hard work in, so the other side puts hard work in. And to me, that's the most important thing, because if you're not really bought into the process on the first instance, from the first sort of point, you're never really going to be able to compete, because there are kids that really want to win in this process, and really it's make or break for them going to the US, and whoever wants it the most, I always say, is going to get out the further. So what I liked about Access USA was very fair in that sense, where you're going to get a lot of help, obviously, if you don't put the effort in, but the more effort you put in, the more help you're going to get, and the better your partnership's going to be. So it was really that combination that really sparked a lot of interest in working with David. And week to week, it obviously intensifies from the moment you start very early on, a year away, and then all of a sudden you see yourself with 2 months to apply and maybe 20 essays to write. So it is intense, but it's intense for everybody. And there's no excuse in saying you're having a tougher time than anybody else. And Access USA, David was to help me week to week. I remember we met every single week, once on a Zoom call, in person, where we discussed a lot of things. But as I said, every single day, David would actually annotate and commentate on the essays I was writing. So I didn't really see it as a once a week thing. I saw it as an everyday thing, really. And to me, as you were saying, David became probably the main person in my life for the 2 months before I applied to ED. And really, even after that process, because obviously you can't risk it all to writing your essays from the 15th of December, which is, 15th of December, mid-December, when you get your ED response, to whenever you apply a regular decision to a lot of these schools. So yeah, main line of takeaway is you get what you put in, I'd say.
I think that's a great synthesis, and you certainly put in a lot, and you made great use of the resources. I was certainly honored to be part of that process with you at that time. Thanks for that. No, absolutely. It's a resource, and students who work hard learn to make great use of that resource. So as you look back now, it's been 2.5 years now?
Yeah,
perhaps?
2.5, 3 years.
Is there something with the benefit of hindsight that you realize now about yourself that came through that whole process of thinking what you wanted to do for the next step in your life? Something you discovered, perhaps? There's a lot of thinking and reflection and writing and communicating is a big part of the process, right?
So I'd say that the US application system is fantastic, even if you manage to yield a result or not, because you really have to first time in your life where you really sit back and reflect on all your years, and you try to communicate what you've done over the past 18 years of your life since you started to gain conscience, and how you want to make an impact with what you've done in the future. So I think it's a fantastic point in your career of sitting down, reflecting on your achievements and trying to portray them to someone else. I also think the US system is fantastic because it forces you to sell yourself a little bit. And I think that no other application system really does enable you to communicate really what you're good at. Because in the UK system, I remember writing UCAS because I applied to all UK universities as well. You just really wrote about an academic interest, and you weren't really emphasizing all the extracurricular, a lot of academic stuff as well. You weren't really even portraying into the picture. So I'd say that the really in life, the most important thing is to sell whatever you do. You got to sell yourself. You got to sell a product, whatever you're going to do. And I probably realize that more now than I did back in the day. Back in the day, you're swamped with 100 essays, different ideas, and you're thinking, wow, what should I do with my life? And you don't really see the benefit of it till you go through the process, really. And the biggest benefit I got from it really was being in the United States. And I do really encourage European kids to go to the United States, because as you probably know, the frontier is in the United States, and really everything really happens there. The needle gets moved in the United States, and every single frontier, whether it's finance, whether it's technology, whether it's medicine. And being at the frontier really makes you realize the importance of being there and hoping that other people get there. And that's why now in hindsight, I really believe that the importance of learning how to communicate your ideas to get to that frontier, and learning how to I think the US process is very fair, and it teaches you good lessons, and being realistic is always important. You can dream, but being realistic is another lesson that I took from the process. And David actually really helped me settle that in, is everyone wants to go to the top schools, but you really got to find your wedge into that process. So I think being realistic, being able to communicate, being able to sell yourself are the three main lessons that I learned throughout the process that are obviously incredibly important for your future and your career.
Good insights for sure, for sure. So now you're at Huntsman and you've been there for some time now and you've certainly settled in and you're finding your way and thinking about what the next steps are. Can you share with our current students, future students, what surprised you the most about the academic experience at Penn as a student in the social environment? Is it what you imagined before you went, or is it something that you found surprising, unexpected?
I think a common theme with everyone when they leave sort of their comfort zone and go somewhere completely different, the first thing they think is, wow, everyone's going to be so much better than me. I'm definitely going to be at a disadvantage and I'm going to be the dumbest person there. And it's going to be incredibly tough for me to settle in. How do I take notes? How do I listen to professors? How do I ask smart questions? And really, when you get there, you realize, wow, okay, I'm actually not much worse than everybody else. If I'm willing to put in the work and put in the hours, I'm actually pretty good, really. And I think that everyone really realizes that if they put in the effort. I'd say on the other hand as well, Penn, Wharton, and Huntsman specifically is a very competitive environment. It's kids that really do strive to achieve very high achieving students. It's very competitive. Wharton's a very competitive school. And I would say that I personally am someone that really does like that. There are other people that I know that are less keen on the competitive side, competitive front. And if that's the case, I'd say potentially maybe Penn is not the best place to look at because it is very competitive. But I'd say that the academic rigor and competitive doesn't necessarily push away that friendliness. And I do really feel that Penn students and Wharton students, although we are competing for the same jobs post-grad, we do help each other a lot. And I'd say that's a big thing. But I'd say don't be intimidated by it, really. I feel like it's all very intimidating from the outside, but when you get there and you start settling in, it's what you've done throughout your 18 years of school, really. It's listening to people speak, synthesizing what they say, understanding it, and then putting it on paper when examinations come, really, and not being fearful of asking questions. And you soon come to realize that there isn't really a dumb question, especially when you're dealing with complicated topics at university. And sometimes questions which you may think are not very interesting spark great academic discussion. That's another thing I realized a lot at Penn. And yeah, it's difficult to grasp at the start. I'm not going to lie to anyone about it, but it's part of the ride, and tough times make great people, as they like to say. And it's never a bad decision to step out of your comfort zone and go into a curriculum which is not necessarily similar to what you are used to. I think the UK and the US systems are fundamentally different, despite many people not understanding that difference. And I was put in the US academic scene and I've absolutely loved it. And as I said, I plan to stay in the United States for a very long time, if not forever, really. I've made some fantastic friends at university. And really, I do believe that my professional goals align with the amount of opportunity there is in the United States. So that's the key takeaway for me.
Okay. So if I'm reading between the lines, one of the things you were most surprised about was how very competent you actually were, huh?
No, I didn't want to portray it that. I don't know if I wanted to portray it in that way.
No, but I think it's inevitable that on the one hand, you feel you're coming to a very competitive place, and it is.
Yeah.
And yet you were.
I think the biggest thing as well that stops a lot of European people from applying to the United States is seeing it as impossible, really. It really isn't impossible. I just think you have to believe in it. You have to work hard. You have to put in the hours, really have to make an effort. And then, of course, when you meet the minimum barrier of academic rigor needed in terms of your grades and what you've done in the past, I think you really have to believe in yourself, really. If someone else has done it, I always use this example that the most critical components of technology that we know today, the iPhone, whether it's the laptop or whether it's microchips, they weren't actually created by anyone who's smarter than yourself or than anybody else, really. It's people that really believed in themselves and wanted to take on the challenge. And it's the fear of taking the challenge that really stops you from getting that. So I really do encourage students to read in between the lines, get into the curriculum and investigate it in a lot of detail, read into professors' research if they're interested in any research in depth, and just really go for it. Have the courage and honor to go for it. That's, I think, the main thing, because no one out there is smarter, better, or even there's always someone smarter than you out there. I like to say that as well, but you could put through hard work and through grinding, as Americans like to say, you can get very, very far.
I think that's a good message. That's a very good message. What's it like to live in the United States? Was that surprising for you? Is something particularly surprising, or how's it been?
I think I've absolutely loved it. I think the United States, I said, is a continent. You can go through the country and travel to many different places and discover quickly that California or Ohio or Nevada have absolutely nothing to do with your Floridas, your New York, and even New York itself. From upstate to Manhattan, you're completely different worlds. And to me, really, what living in the United States has really meant has been being exposed to incredibly ambitious people, incredibly ambitious professional settings. And I've heavily enjoyed that because I feel that Europe really does lack that right now in the moment. And I'm a big Europe believer. And I do think through hard work, we can get back this innovation and this productivity gains, which Europe used to have historically through the Industrial Revolution and across other points in history. But it's really been, the US is I'd say it's incredibly homely receiving to different cultures and different settings. At the end of the day, it's a country that's made of immigrants, people coming from all different backgrounds. I have friends that are American, but have heritage from sort of Eastern Europe, Italy, France, Germany, all types of backgrounds and Asian backgrounds as well. And I do think that everyone really has a place in the United States, and the American dream is still very present. And really what I really love about the United States, I mean, as you can probably tell from the past 20 minutes we've been speaking, is the opportunity. I think the opportunity that young, ambitious people can get is unmatched. And that really should give a lot of people encouragement to go out there and really seek that opportunity. And I've loved it. As I've said, a testament to how much I've enjoyed being in the US is that I want to stay there for my whole life, which is pretty uncommon with a lot of people that go there for university. A lot of people usually want to go back, maybe work a few years in the US, 5-10 years, and then go back. But as I said, my plan is actually to stay long-term in the United States, which a lot of Americans find funny as well. But I'm very happy to and looking forward to being there in the long term.
Yeah. That's great. Look, I really appreciate your sharing your personal experience, your perspective. It's going to be hugely useful, no doubt, for students who are where you were 2 or 3 years ago, thinking about this next step and looking at their options and considering what the next step should be. So I just have a couple more questions.
Of course, Dave, of course.
We'll wrap it up. Again, I really appreciate your time. So if you could speak to that student who was in your position, who now is in the position you were and feels perhaps overwhelmed by the process, what kind of advice would you give them? What would you tell them?
The first thing I'd say is I love this quote from Winston Churchill, who used to always say, "This too shall pass." And I do think it's very true. I think that if tough times are met with courage and actual discipline to sit down and confront this overwhelming process, because it's overwhelming for everybody. Whoever says it's not overwhelming is lying about it, really. And it's tough for everybody. And I think that acknowledging that it's tough for everybody, but it's those that actually confront and spend the hours dwelling and swimming in that pool of nonsense of all these different pieces of information that you have to sift through and synthesize together, I think really are the people that end up winning. And I think it's a fantastic lesson for life in general, going through this process, because if you really put in the hours and put in the effort, you can really get something valuable out of it. And I've never really actually met someone who I thought put in an amazing amount of work for this process and was well suited for it and didn't get an outcome. So I know maybe David knows many more people than I do, potentially differs in opinion. But that's what I've really seen. And I really realized that not just with US universities process, but with, for example, applying for a professional setting. I was applying to investment banking roles in New York. And it's really the people that put in the effort and put in the hours usually have a pretty good shot. And there's no magic recipe, there's no magic formula, but just sitting there and constantly be thinking about these things, even if you're not at your desk. I remember David used to tell me this: when you're lying in bed and staring at your ceiling, you may actually come up with the best ideas. So it's when you're playing sport, it's when you're disconnected, that sometimes the best ideas come through. And it's leaving things to the last moment is actually incredibly problematic for this process. It really doesn't yield great success. I'm actually someone that actually does sometimes leave things to the last moment and loves just getting things done before they're due. And I find it tough to sit down, really sit down and work very hard without pressure. But this process is really something that teaches you can't do. That does not work, because it's a lot of hours of thinking, a lot of hours of actually building that confidence as well. The more hours you spend on something, the more you believe you can achieve it. And even if it's to some degree, not as realistic, because obviously the percentage points nowadays of getting into these American institutions are not in your favor. Let's be honest, the odds are not in your favor. But you slowly start to believe in yourself, and you're going to realize you start writing better essays, you start writing better ideas, communicating better. And I think the magic ref formula is hours without end. And actually buying into the process doesn't just mean writing about yourself. It means really understanding what those institutions are looking for. Each institution looks for a different thing. Penn looks for a different thing than Stanford does. And don't get me wrong, Stanford's a fantastic institution, in my opinion, one of the leading institutions now, if not the leading one, in a lot of aspects of today's current situation in technology. But I won't say that it's a two-way process. David will be there to help you like he helped me. And you got to put in the hours. As I mentioned, it's a two-way street. But I just say believe in yourself, really. That's my main takeaway. I think people underestimate how far they can get and how far someone coming from a different background and a different system can get, really. I've seen how well European and non-US students in these institutions thrive, and it's truly remarkable. I think a lot of the top academics actually are not American who come into these institutions and thrive. And I'd say patience is also key. Sometimes you can be writing thoughts down and really nothing valuable is coming. But all of a sudden, after spending 4 hours on a blank page, you're not really getting very far. You go and play a game of soccer, go and play a game of, I don't know, netball, lacrosse, whatever you do in your life. And all of a sudden, an idea sparks. So I said, don't get bogged down in the thick of spending a lot of hours on something and not getting a lot of output from it. It's part of the process. It's part of everything. And be patient.
Yeah, the patience, I think, correlates to preparing in advance and not leaving things for the last minute, because your ideas tend to mature over time as you have new inputs, new insights, new conversations.
Yeah, I agree completely. I don't think you can do this process in 3 weeks, in a month, in 2 months, really. Yeah. I remember the first drafts of essays and ideas I used to write were probably, I don't think I would have gotten into any institution. That's probably the truth. And at the end, I think I wrote a batch of essays that was convincing, that really portrayed the ideas that I wanted to communicate. And it's this whole idea, again, as I said, of painting the oil canvas. You want to portray so many different ideas, but you really don't have much space to do that. I said that you have to write so many essays, but imagine an individual university that only allows you to write 1,500 words in total. That's really not very much, or even 1,000 words in total. And having someone on the other side that can synthesize your thoughts is very important. But again, I just can't stop thinking about the idea of really just believing in yourself and going for it. Hard work gets met with great results. And people usually complain that the world is unfair, that you really sometimes don't get what you put in. I actually tend to disagree. I think the world is very fair, and it treats those who work very hard and put a lot into it with great fairness. And very weirdly, those that don't really put much in from their perspective with great unfairness. And I'll leave you to judge whatever conclusion you want to get out of that statement. But I think it's very true.
Yeah, fair enough. That's really sound advice. Prepare early, take the challenge head on, confront the challenge, self-reflection, all very good advice for sure. So one last question, and then I'll let you get on with your time there in Madrid. In one sentence, how would you describe your experience working with Access USA? One sentence. Take your time.
Yeah, let me think about this. Just putting everything to one sentence is probably a bit complicated, but
you can record it later if you want to send it to me. That's easier.
You probably got this part of me thinking like this, but it's hard. I think that I think my experience was really, I could believe, because also Access USA believed in myself, really. I think that I really banged on about this two-way street and partnership that really this is. And I think that the Access USA has probably been one of the best partnerships that I've had throughout my career. And I'd really emphasize the word partnership. And I think that working together closely on that partnership to win together has been the biggest thing that I think Access USA has given me. Now, I had a fantastic experience because, as I said, I sometimes get frustrated when I put in a lot of work and the other party doesn't put in work. And I really felt that I was met with hard work, deep thinking from you, David, and from the team straight away as soon as I put out. I don't think there was a single day where I worked till late at night and on the next morning you didn't acknowledge that and actually gave me very good output on the next morning. So I think if I can summarize everything in one sentence, it would be, I think together with Access USA, I think we founded a partnership that really made me believe and made me strive for my dreams and really changed my perspective on a process which I thought was actually impossible to achieve at one point, and really break it down step by step and make me believe this was possible. And I'm super happy to speak to absolutely anyone who wants to hear more about Access USA and wants to hear more about the partnership that I've spoken about throughout this conversation, because it really was game changing for me. And that's how I sell it off to everybody who asks me about it that David doesn't know and asks for advice applying to this process. But I would really say that I've heard a lot of people who've worked with a lot of people and a lot of applicants that have worked with a lot of advisors. And I looked at a number of advisors for this process, and not to deem anybody down or criticize anybody, but I couldn't be happier with my process, disregarding the outcome, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the luck of the draw a little bit, as I mentioned, but when you apply to a series of schools, if you put in a lot of hard work, usually success is met. But really, they made me believe, and I am here thanks to a lot of people that helped me along the way. But I have to say that a big part of the reason why I'm here in the United States is thanks to Access USA. So always going to be grateful, always going to remember Access USA, and always going to tell people about my experience with them, great experience with them, and still a relationship with them today. David and I still speak, even if we don't have these conversations, we still speak. I asked David for advice, and David asked me about different perspectives at Penn. So still happy to maintain that relationship.
Thanks very much for that. I appreciate all the kind words. And certainly for me, it was a very enriching process as well. And I'm so happy to see you achieve your goal for sure.
And anyway, something I think, David, sorry, I just came to my mind that I'd want to say as well, is that when I went into the process, I was only thinking of a lot of schools that make the headlines. And sometimes you get bogged down in these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names, which are incredibly big names, but you really disregard a batch of universities, which I think is remarkable. And really, when you get there, you start to realize how remarkable a lot of these institutions that maybe don't make as many of the headlines as your Ivy Leagues or as your Stanford and MIT. And when you start digging down, you really realize how good the professional outcomes are from those universities, sometimes even better, and the experience of those universities. So I would really say, listen to David when he says, look at the school potential which you hadn't thought about, or look at this university. And that was also a big takeaway that I potentially didn't learn from my time with David at the moment, but in that specific moment, but I have really realized now. And I have friends from all types of universities, all different universities, who are incredibly successful and will be incredibly successful, probably much more successful than I will be. And then a lot of students of potentially the headline universities, as I like to call them, are going to be. So learn from that.
No, that's an important realization for sure. There are lots of great professionals who came from universities we've never heard of, or that aren't
exactly
all the time.
Exactly.
Sure. More about the person. Anyway, so let's leave it there. I really appreciate the conversation and your sharing your wisdom and your experience and your perspective with younger students who are just beginning the process and really, in many cases, perhaps are apprehensive about the next step and eager to learn from those who've gone before them. So really appreciate that. This is hugely helpful. So when are you around to? When are you going to be you're in Madrid? Yeah,
I'm in Madrid right now, and I'm heading off to Paris back for the remaining part of the semester, and then I'm start my internship on June 1st in the city.
Great. How long are you in Madrid?
I'm in Madrid this whole week until Saturday.
We should try to get together for a coffee.
Yes, David, I'd love to. Honestly, I have a car. I'm mobile. I can go up to La Moraleja, which I remember you were based there. I don't know if that's still...
Well, I'll give you a shout and we'll set something up. Let me look at my calendar and
Yes, please. I'd love to catch up and also listen to major advice from you.
Happy to chat. Give you my opinion.
The coin. No, I'd love to. I'd love to, David. So let me know. And as always, I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Appreciate it very much. It's great help for sure. And I'll drop you a line now. We'll see if we can meet him.
I will. I'm motivating my brother slowly to this. He's very young, but I think he's got powder in the barrel, as I like to say.
Next generation of Fontana. Okay.
Exactly.
How are your parents doing?
They're doing great. They're doing great. Dad's at work and Mum's here at home as well. And I think they feel a bit empty nesters now with my brother Harrow. just started at Harrow. So it's a bit of a different time for them, but you got to adjust. You got to adjust. Really.
Well, I'm sure they're glad to have you around. Send my regards, please.
I will do, David, of course.
Best, and I'll drop you a line. We'll see if we can get together.
Of course.
For coffee.
David, thank you
Okay?
very much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
and
it.
cheers to Access USA. Bye.
Great to see you.